Number one, if you're a baby boomer but have kids who are millennials, and if you're in business and you're wondering, how do I market to the millennials? And if you're a millennial, you want to find out what you can do to straighten your life out at some level and not make the same mistakes the baby boomers did. Because what we're talking about today is the millennial generation, which is bigger than the baby boom generation. So, I'm at the top of the baby boom, which is baby boom was 46 to 64, and millennials in 1980 to 2000. So what's coming into the pipeline right now as the millennials, again, 1980 to 2000, they're like the big anaconda that swallowed the pig, that goes through the system, and they disrupt, they enhance, they boom, they make some people rich, they make some people poor. And the millennial generation is unlike any other generation in many ways, simply because when you think about this, when I went to school at college, we had a mainframe computer, and it took up a whole bloody room with air conditioning and all this, and we had no idea. It had punch cards and all this. And now, so that was me when I was 18 years old. And today, a millennial has a cell phone in their hand with more power than that mainframe computer. So the amount of power that has gone up for millennial generations to use is not even, the word's not even exponential. It's beyond belief. So once again, if you're a parent and you have a child that's a millennial, or that you're a business person, you want to know how to market to the millennials because they are the future, the baby boomers are phasing out. Or if you're a millennial and you want to figure out how do you maximize this advantage you have of technology that the generations prior to you never had, this is your program for you. My sweetheart is in Hilton Head, South Carolina. She'll be calling in. And also we have in studio Greg Arthur, who is our guy in charge of, he's a millennial, but how do you deal with millennials as a business? And third, we have Jason Dorsey, who is a guy that has carved out the niche as the expert on the generation of millennial research. So he's going to be telling the old guys like myself, what do they need to know? So Kim, what do you want to say?
I'm so excited about this show, and I'm so excited to talk to Jason and to Greg. People, especially if you're in business today, a lot of times people think that everybody's like them, and they think like I do, and they want what I want. And the millennials, the Gen Y, they are not like the baby boomers, and they are not like Gen X's. And if you're in business and you've got to reach them, there's 79.8 million millennials out there. That's a huge market, and I think that's going to turn business on its head. So I'm very excited to learn, what are the characteristics of Gen Y, the millennials, and how do you market to them? What do they want, and what's different about them than the baby boomers and the Gen X? So I'm thrilled. I'm excited for our business. I'm excited to, as you say, Robert, for parents. I do know some parents who have millennials, and they're like, what do I do with them? So this is going to be a fun show.
Right, and we have Greg Arthur, because in the Rich Dad Company, we actually have two companies. One for the old guys like me, and then we have Shane, who is our president, and he's more for the young guys. So Greg is the guy who has to bridge the gap, and sometimes it's a little tough, right, Greg?
Oh my gosh, sometimes it's so confusing. Which voice you use, who you're speaking to, which product we're making for which audience. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of work that goes on.
Yeah, and I really don't understand it that much. That's why I'm very happy to step aside and let a millennial run the show, and guys like Greg, do the implementation of it, because otherwise I would screw myself up. So joining us today is the expert on millennial research. He is the founder of the Center for Generational Kinetics, and he is the author of Why Size Your Business, and other book is My Reality Check Bounce. His name is Jason Dorsey. So Jason's been on our program before, and every time he speaks, we have to listen, because like I said, he is a guy that's telling us of the biggest boom coming, which is the millennials. So welcome to the program, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having me back on. Glad to be here and glad to represent my generation.
We're glad to have you represented, Jason. Thanks for joining us today.
So let's start with what's the difference between the old baby boomers and the new baby boomers?
I love that concept. The new baby boomers, like we're suddenly going to get landlines.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's break down who the millennials are. I mean, I'm a millennial, and I'm passionate about it, and it's what our research is focused on. The key thing to recognize is that millennials are the children of baby boomers. And in terms of size, we're almost exactly the same size of a generation as boomers. And as you know really well, boomers changed everything. And we believe that millennials will do the same thing. In fact, we're already seeing it right now in terms of how millennials are changing how companies market, what employers have to offer in order to be able to get us to stay at a company or take a job, or how we look at money. You know, we've got a huge portion of millennials that don't like credit cards. They prefer debit cards. So we've got this big generation, fastest growing generation in the workforce today, fastest growing generation of consumers. And what I think should get everybody's attention who is at all in the world of business is in 2017, which is not that far away, millennials will outspend baby boomers in the U.S. And in fact, the trend accelerates because boomers enter a life phase which is generally less is more at the exact same time that millennials are entering the accumulation phase, where we're buying stuff and, as you know, getting in debt and drowning in student loan debt. So we're in very different sides of the spending spectrum. And what we discovered at our center that I think is so important for your work, Robert, is that when we think about millennials, people like to put us in one big group of 80 million, but what we discovered is we're two different generations. You have one part of the generation doing everything that we were supposed to do. You know, we went to college and we graduated, maybe we're getting married, we're having kids, we're doing all those things. We're just doing them later. In fact, your employees at the Rich Dad companies, you know, your and Kim's employees, many of them are millennials, and, you know, they show up generally on time, right? And their pants aren't falling off, and they're doing a great job for you. But then there's a whole other part of the generation that really puts our country at risk, to be quite honest with you, that aren't creating what we call real-world traction, that aren't able to find their way in the world. And as the generation splits apart, what's shocking for us that we discovered is around the age of 30, you select into one part of the generation or the other, and you can no longer relate to the other part of your generation. So you don't understand why they don't have their act together, or vice versa. They don't understand how you have it so good.
So are you saying that the baby boomers were cohesive compared to the millennials?
No, I wouldn't argue that. What I would say is that people naturally assume millennials are all the same, and the reality is that we see them breaking into two different groups, which is not necessarily a new concept, but to see it so early is new.
So is it? What is it? Is it psychographic, economic, or is it? What is it? You know, because I've always seen multiple groups. Like when I look at the baby boomers, we were the richest. You know, we started with the coonskin caps with Davy Crockett movie, and we became the biggest consumer generation in history. But now, and they had it lucky. You know, the baby boomers were really the lucky generation because we didn't have student loans. Everything was kind of affordable. We had the biggest boom from 1970 to 2000. Many baby boomers did nothing, and they became what they call the millionaire next door. Mm-hmm. But now, all of a sudden, the baby boomers are busting into two parts also, and it's called the haves and have-nots. So the baby boomers are busting up also. So what's different with that and then the millennials? You know, what is it? Is it psychographic or economic?
It's a little bit of both. What we look at is trajectory. What path are you on, and does it lead to this kind of what you would call self-reliance? And what we're seeing is that there's a lot of millennials who are not essentially entering the real world and finding that success quickly. In fact, it's a mix of local economics. Some markets just haven't recovered. Everybody thinks U.S. is doing great. I go to cities all the time that are still they're still struggling, and some are doing better than others, but you know, certainly struggling. The other part is you've got a lot of millennials who don't want to take jobs that are beneath them, which is a big deal. You know, you got to get in where you can fit in and work your way up. And then, as you pointed out, we've got over $1 trillion in college loan debt already. So you put that combination together, you've got one group that's out there taking action, that's making it happen. And in fact, they are the group most offended by millennials acting entitled, are the millennials who do not feel entitled.
So Jason, you said that in 2017, the millennials are going to outspend the baby boomers. So you're talking about there's a lot of millennials not finding their way. I hear this thing of entitlement. So how are they going to outspend us? It doesn't seem like they have that much money and they have a lot of debt. And what are they spending their money on?
Oh, so many great questions, Kim. As usual, I expect nothing less. When you look at us, just think about the life stage. So boomers, as we talked about, are into this kind of less is more, and we see them trying to downsize and simplify their lives and really push back on a lot of their spending. They're entering that phase. My dad's a great example. He's trying to get his expenses as low as possible. He's trying to do everything he can to make what money he does have last as long as possible. So they're spending. Now, it's not their wealth or their net worth, but their spending is going down. Millennials, being about the same size, are now about 18 to 35 or 37, depending on how you look at it. We're in the exact wealth accumulation phase when you actually start earning money. So our average earner continues to go up and up and up. And in fact, a quarter of all new millionaires in the United States this year are millennials. So when you think about us, the idea that we're all broke, which is kind of the public persona, is not very true. It's why all these companies are spending so much money trying to win our business, because we are the engine that continues to spend. And as you guys know all too well, spending, you could spend money you don't have.
Okay, once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, really the Rich Dad Radio Show. We're talking to Jason Dorsey. We're talking about the next baby boom. It's called the millennial generation. And as we're hearing, the baby boomers are phasing out, which means they're cutting down on spending, just at the same time as 80 million millennials start accumulating wealth and they hit their peak spending years. But as you know, the generations are different simply because my generation, we didn't have student loan debts. Colleges were cheap. When I was hitting peak earning years, I got 15% interest at the bank. Today, you get nothing at the bank. And so there's a whole generational shift here. The big advantage the millennial has, like I said at the start of this whole thing, is that when I went to school in New York, I saw the first mainframe computer. It took up, a huge room. It was air conditioned, yada yada yada. It had punch cards. I had no idea what it was. But today the millennials have a cell phone, an iPhone, Samsung, and it has more power than that mainframe computer. So with all the problems, every generation has problems. Nobody has it easy. Some have it easier. But anyway, with all that power, it's going to affect the spending patterns, but also it affects how you spend time at home. We're joined by Jason Dorsey. He is the expert, the Gen Y guy. He's the expert on millennial research. He founded the Center for Generational Kinetics. And joining us from Hilton Head, South Carolina, because Kim is with her parents. So Kim is calling in, so the sounds a little bit different as Kim is calling in from South Carolina. And also we have Greg Arthur, who, like I said, the Rich Dad Company is two companies. We have the old guys, because I'm dealing with the old guys and their challenges. And then Greg our president is a Gen Yer, a Gen Xer. And it's like two different companies in how we talk and how we communicate with different people. And my point here is regardless if you're Generation X, Y, Z, or baby boomers, we all deal with money. And I want to know how we deal with our money differently. You see, the baby boomers came in at the biggest boom in world history. It was 1970 to the year 2000. And then, as you know, in 2001, 9/11 hit. And the world has changed, and the governments of the world have started to print money like we've never seen before. So in my generation, the boomers, I see it right now. It is definitely haves and have-nots. The baby boomers have run out of time. They do not have the ability to recuperate or the time to recuperate. Most of them are set in their ways. They cannot learn, whereas the millennials still have that time. So that's what we're talking about, is what is the difference between the two generations. But really, as Jason earlier said, is that there's two kinds of millennials now. Those who are going the way of their parents, and one who are becoming the rebels going the other side of it. So that is what we're discussing today. It's how you deal with them as a parent if you're a baby boomer with a millennial child. And if you're an employer, how do you deal with them? And if you're dealing with money, how do you deal with them? So Kim, what would you like to say?
Well, Jason, I have a question because I have two nieces, and they are from my two different sisters. And they're exactly what you're saying. One is the hard-driving, Gen Y, got the business going, really driven. And the other is this entitlement. Everybody's going to take care of me. I don't have to worry. I'm in la-la land. So my question is, what role do parents play in raising Gen Y kids? Because these are totally different kids.
Yeah, that's a great question and very insightful. What we see is that, and look, people don't like to hear this, but what it comes down to is this. Entitlement as a behavior is 100% learned. You are not born entitled. You have to be raised that way. And it's not necessarily an education thing or an economic thing or any of that stuff. Everybody loves to say that. It's not true. It's really a parenting thing, and it's how you're raised by your parents. That's where you get the models from, as you guys talk about so frequently in your books. But then it's reinforced in schools, and then it becomes a norm in society. And if you really come of age thinking that your parents will always save you, well, all of a sudden, you don't have to take those risks. You don't have to take those responsibilities. And I was just talking with a parent after one of my events, and she said, I don't know what to do. My daughter still lives with me, and I feel like I need to cut her off. And I was like, well, how old is she? And she said, oh, well, she's 32. I was like, 32?
Yep.
And she's living with you? And you wonder why she's,
about.
And I'm not. It's not a judgment. People sometimes think it's judging. It's not judging. The reality is, as long as you let other people live off your hard work and your means, and not position them to have to learn those skills, learn the resilience, get that drive, why are they going to change?
So Jason, Jason,
Yes,
there's
sir.
probably millennials who agree with you, and there's millennials who think you're the devil incarnated, right?
Yeah, they definitely don't like when I say that, but it's true. I mean, we have data that shows how you are raised really impacts your view on the world, your personal accountability, your personal responsibility. And there's many millennials that say, look, my sister is a great example of this. I love her more than anything. I mean, she's my little sister. But she was told, when you finish college, take your time to figure it out. And that was wonderful, good, well-intentioned advice. The problem is there's now no urgency and there's no recourse for her not figuring it out quickly. I was told when I wanted to start my own business, if that's what you want to do and you're not going to finish school, well, then we have to cut you off. Well, guess what? I was making money the next day because I had to.
So, Jason,
Yes,
how does it work? How does it work in? Because I've heard that millennials are expected to inherit $41 trillion.
No, not trillion, Kim.
So
Kim,
I'm not going to
41 trillion is a little high.
They're going to inherit a lot of money. And
Thank you.
does that keep the entitlement thing going?
Yeah, so we're actually doing 2 national studies right now on millennials and money. And what we're preliminarily seeing is that what millennials expect to inherit is often way out of line with what they will actually inherit. Because boomers are living a lot longer, and the cost of them living longer, many of them, as you point out, Robert, over and over again, they're not prepared for it. And so they're spending down what would be inherited. However, what we do believe is, and what we see through our research, is that millennials are not well-versed in money. They're not well-versed in finance. We need to get them all reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Well, Jason, this is the point I'd like to put on with you right now. Neither are the baby boomers. The baby boomers were the luckiest generation of all, simply because Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971. The economy boomed. You bought this house. Like my father bought a house for $50,000, and a few years later it was worth $4 million. And he thought he was Albert Einstein when it comes to money. But it was inflation that got him there. And then what happens when he lost it all, he didn't know how to recover it. So that's why I'm saying it's the same problem. Different generations is also economic times. Because where your generation is going to run into headwind is I don't think you're going to have the growth, the boom that the baby boomers had. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think your generation knows that. They know that their old man and old lady, they had it pretty good. Their mom and dad had it pretty good. They bought a house and they made a lot of money. They had a job. They got pay raises and all that. But your generation doesn't have the economic boom. The baby boomers were just luckier, being in the right place at the right time. Hey, Greg, when you're marketing to, because Rich Dad markets to 2 generations,
Right.
the old guys and the young guys.
Right.
What are you guys doing different?
A lot of it is the products that we market to them, and a lot of it is the voice that we use. A lot of times we'll send out an email. If it's from Robert Kiyosaki, because Robert Kiyosaki doesn't really believe in entitlement so much, and he takes a little harder stand, it's more towards the older generation. If it comes from Rich Dad, the company, it's going to be a little bit more, you can do it, you have it inside you, that type of speech.
Gag me with a spoon.
Right, that's why it doesn't come from you. I think that would kill you if you read that.
So Jason, what do you think about that as a marketing strategy from a company with old guys and young guys?
I think Greg's right on. The reality is many millennials don't do well hearing that, hey, you're not going to probably get Social Security. and your house is probably not going to go up in value like your parents did, and you're not going to get a pension and all these things, and you've got to figure it out on your own. So get started now, or you're doomed.
What?
That doesn't really, drive us.
Okay,
as much as what Greg said.
So let me reset this, and then I'll ask the next question. Okay. So once again, we're talking to Jason Dorsey, and he is the expert on generation millennials. 1980 to 2000. There's some of the still teenagers, some are in the mid-30s. So Jason, like I won't mention who, but a millennial, and this guy is the biggest wimp I've ever met. He talks nice, he does this, he's always on his cell phone, he has all the answers, highly educated, but he doesn't do anything. So when I bark at him, he goes into his shell like a turtle. So how do I talk to somebody like that who really is nice kid, smart, strong, healthy? He lives at home, sucks his thumb, and goes to work. How do you talk to them?
Well, first of all, I think you should not be talking to them. Let's let Greg talk to them.
Hey, I love you.
That is so true.
Jason, I love you, man. I love you. That's the best thing, because I cannot take it. I sit there and look at them. I go, oh, my God.
No, the more you talk to them, the more you're going to get frustrated. But to give you the actual answer to that, because that's one of the things we study in the workforce, I'll give you some kind of best practices that we see. We see that millennials do much better when they have ongoing feedback, kind of 30 seconds once a week check-ins to let them know how they're doing, where they are, that you notice they exist. Boomers do not like to do that, and I'll be very direct why. And that is because boomers were taught if your boss is talking to you, you're doing something wrong. My generation was taught if your boss is not talking to you, you're doing something wrong. It's a huge rift we see across companies.
Well, how did that happen? How did that happen?
Well, because we got trophies for everything. I mean, we get ribbons for showing up. It's amazing. Like, we cannot lose, So we got great inflation.
They need the attention. They need the attention. They need to know that somebody's looking at them. They're seeing them. They exist.
Yeah. Well, and you're exactly right. And attention's one word. Another word is they just need that engagement or input. We live in a society, as Robert talks about so much, where our relationship with technology is different. I mean, we're on Facebook 20 times a day because we want to know who saw what, how did that happen, and we've come of age with constant feedback. And now you put us in a work environment where there's no feedback, many of us feel lost. So the other thing that you do is you have to give us either project plans or very specific outcomes that we can work towards. When Robert says, get there on time and do a good job, well, that means something very specific to him. It probably means show up early and don't leave it till you finish, where we're like, whoa, work-life balance, 10 a.m. feels good. So lost is kind of this generational dialogue that means different things to different people. So certainly we want to give a lot of specific examples. And another thing that a lot of, frankly, boomers don't like to do because they consider it coddling or catering is on the very front, we do a lot more training. And the reason is millennials are entering the workforce later than any other generation with less real-world experience. So we show up and we may have fancy degrees, but we don't know how to shake your hand. We don't know how to have a meeting with you. We don't understand what any of the stuff is you're asking us to do. Like, we've got great degrees, but we've never actually experienced it or done it. And so what we work with a lot of companies on is creating these specific examples for that onboarding piece, because our research showed over 60% of all millennials decide within their first month whether or not they can stay at a job, and a huge number decide on their first day. Well, boomers, you showed up and you gave it a chance and you stuck with it because you weren't going to work anywhere for at least less than a year. For us, I mean, you fire us, what happens? We go home. We live with our mom. She's not going to raise the rent. You know what I mean?
Okay, once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki of the Rich Dad Radio Show. We're talking to Jason Dorsey. He's the expert on millennial research. We're talking about the two different generations. And today joining us is Jason Dorsey. He's the expert on millennial research. Also in the studio today with me is Greg Arthurs. Like we said, Rich Dad is really two companies. We have the old guys and the new guys, and we have to market to them differently. And joining me from South Carolina is my sweetheart Kim, where she is doing her duty as daughter to her mother. So she's very responsible generation baby boom. Kim, what would you like to say?
I'd like to ask Jason, because, as Greg says, we're marketing different products to different generations, different people, who goes to what. So can you tell me now, you got 80 million millennials, they're starting to spend money, they're starting to get married, have kids, some are moving out of the house. What businesses or products are really going to benefit from the millennials and what type of business they're going to start facing challenges?
Got it. Great one. Well, and remember how I said that millennials are breaking into two generations? And so when we work with companies that are marketing to them, you want to be sensitive to which part of the generation you're marketing to. The millennial living at home with a lot of debt or certainly not out there doing what they want to be doing, they're going to have a different spending profile than the one that's 28 years old, married with a kid on the way. So looking at those that are doing the more traditional path, the businesses that are going to benefit finally are, for example, automakers. They're having great quarters. They're doing really well again, and much of that growth is driven by millennials. And this is important because 3 years ago we came out and said millennials are going to still buy cars in record numbers, and everybody trashed us and said that's not going to happen. Millennials, they want to save the earth. They're going to live in urban areas. They're going to do all this stuff, all of which is sort of true until you get in serious relationships and you move to the suburbs, right? And so what happens is it's very inconvenient to tote your kid around on the subway when you live outside of town. And we see when you need more space, you move out of those urban areas. So automakers are a great example. If you think about other things that happen at those key life moments, life insurance. Life insurance is benefiting in a big way from millennials finally choosing to get married or have their first kids. That's when people buy life insurance. We also see a lot of the luxury brands, and I know it doesn't sound like a luxury brand, but things like Starbucks, which is a very premium-priced coffee, these kind of simple luxuries are doing really, really well. To look at the other end of the spectrum, we're seeing a big growth in the share economy, which is the idea that, your home-aways, your places where you can borrow an experience without actually having to be on the hook for it. So all of those traditional kind of experiences that were pushed off, we're seeing millennials finally do them, and we think over the next 5 years they'll be doing them in record numbers. We also think you're going to see a lot more, and I know this is not great for the rest of us, but you're going to see a lot of people intervening, trying to help millennials who are drowning in debt. And even though it's a lot harder than ever to get credit for many of them, they still manage to rack it up, especially student loan debt. And at some point, they're going to need a lot of help and education to try to figure out how to get out of that. In fact, we think, as Robert spoke to earlier, kind of this have and the have-nots. The millennials who today, and I can't say this enough, the millennials who today learn how to manage their money and really learn the concepts of wealth creation, all the things that you could talk about, have literally an unfair advantage over all the other millennials, because they're going to have such a head start over the rest of them. They're going to put another 10, 15, 20 years trying to figure it out. So we think all those traditional brands are going to do well. The people that are struggling are legacy brands that we think are for our parents. If it's something that we think, our parents like that, millennials generally don't want anything to do with it. You could see that now with some of the fast food chains that millennials now want, organic or locally sourced and so forth. You're going to see more and more of that.
McDonald's is out. McDonald's and Burger King are out.
Brands like that are really, really struggling to win millennials, and it's hard to say if they'll be able to win them back, because once you become established to represent a certain thing, it's very hard to change that mental assignment of value. If you think about a brand in a certain way, you just generally don't change it. The cool thing, though, for all the business owners out there that are listening, and I know you guys have so many of them, is that millennials are also the generation most up for grabs as consumers. So even though there's brands that have a tough road ahead, most millennials are the ones most up for grabs. So in the sense that we'll try a new company, a new restaurant, a different insurance provider, because we don't associate the fact that you've been around for 50 years to really mean anything. So it does create this great space for marketers like Greg and others who are out there saying we need to innovate, we need to show people that we do have the solution. And I think the key is you've got to fit our life stage now. And if you think that all millennials are like boomers who are 26, had a kid or two, you're going to miss millennials, because we don't. I mean, we're the first generation where we're likely to see the average age of us having our first child exceed the age of 30. I mean, that's a seismic shockwave for our country when it finally happens. So up for grabs, most to spend, but it's whoever adapts to us wins. And just because you helped our parents or you've been around a long time doesn't necessarily give you advantage reaching us.
Okay, so once again, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. We're talking to Jason Dorsey, and he is the expert on millennial research, and he's the author of My Reality Check Bounce. I've had that problem, too. And then Y, capital Y, size your business. His website is jasondorsey.com, and he's available to help certain companies adjust their marketing strategies to a whole nother generation with different, and in a different economic time. That's the big part. So, just before we came in today, Greg Arthur was here in the studio with me, and Kim is in Hilton Head, South Carolina. Greg and I were talking, we want to build this product, How to Manage Your Money. And so, I was talking to Greg about that just as this thing came on. So, Jason, if you were advising us on how to build a product, on how to manage your money for millennials, what would you do?
Well, it's a great question. So the first thing we would do is we would tell you that the word manage and money mean different things to millennials than they do to most other generations. So even the concept of managing your money is one that you get very, very definitions of from millennials. So the first thing we would say is to really focus on a positioning that either speaks to millennials' pain or to their dreams that they can actually relate to. So it might be, instead of, how to manage your money, which doesn't sound like a win, it might be, how to get out of debt in 90 days. I know you wouldn't use that title, but you get the idea.
Jason,
yeah.
we use those titles. We use those titles because of the feedback we get from the web. Well, why don't you explain to Jason why you're using those titles?
Sure. So, Jason, we have a strategy that we use. What we do is we'll throw out something on Facebook. Well, actually, we'll throw out like 20 things on Facebook, and then we'll see which one has the most traction. Then what we do is we write blogs about whatever was most successful, and we see, what part of that rises to the top. Then what we do is we write an ebook based on those, and we see which one of those rise to the top. And the one that came to our audience, by far, the greatest desired, was Manage Your Money.
It was that title.
It was that title, yes.
Yeah, and so we're a research firm, so that process would work, but it's also immensely biased, because it's biased in the sense that everybody that you reached out to has already raised their hand and said they're somewhat interested in you, more than likely.
Correct.
If they're Facebook or they're blog readers or whatever. And, our work, because we work with such big national brands, they can't do that, right? That would be too limiting because the market would be too small. So what we have to do is say, if we wanted to have the greatest penetration of millennials in America that fit a certain demographic, which would probably be either have this much money or willing to spend so much money or have these kind of financial goals, what would actually best jive with them? Because our goal would be to grow your market rather than just to take more market share that you already have. Does that make sense?
Oh, completely.
So our whole goal is always to, if you're looking at a generational win, there's 80 million millennials. Nobody's going to win all of them. But what can we do to win the most of them and really prepare them for success? And so we would take an approach that would look at it that way. But what's important about what you did is it actually told you of people that like you that we think are millennials because you somehow have access to their birth year or their current age. This is the thing that says that what they're interested in. So I would call that an incremental type program because it's going to help you to help people that already like you. Our goal is always, well, if you've never thought about buying, I'm just making this up, a BMW before, how do we get millennials to consider a BMW? How do we get you to look for it online? And then how do I get you to show up in a dealership and be prepared to buy, even if nobody in your family has ever bought a luxury car before?
So what words would you use for manage your money and we have a get out of debt product? What words would you use?
Well, I think we would test all of them in the studies that we would do, and we would have to look at, do they want to, so I'll give you an example because we're doing 2 surveys on this right now. How millennials define wealth or money or being rich is dramatically different. Some people think it's, I need to save, and I know, Robert and Kim, I know this will all sound elementary to y'all, so bear with me. But some millennials really think that being able to retire, for example, or being financially free is about having a certain amount of money in the bank. I know you don't even have to school me on it. I get it. There's another group that will think it's, I just don't have to work. And there's a whole other group like that we would show you how to market to, which are millennials who, only want to work when they want to, right? So when we survey millennials and say, would you rather, if we could show you how to get to $1 million, would you rather do that in, X amount of time? Or what if I could show you how to not have to work on Fridays within the next 2 years? I mean, off the charts, they'll say, I want to not work on Fridays. So we'd have to investigate it. But I think the idea is that millennials are coming to money in terms of their interaction with it later than before. People think they're more connected than ever before, but that's a bit of a fallacy because just because you're better connected does not mean you're better informed. When you talk to insurance providers and car dealers and everybody else, financial advisors, they will tell you that millennials ask the least knowledgeable questions is a nice way to put it. So in many ways, we have to take the concepts that you guys have perfected, and I don't want to say dumb them down, but you've got to repackage them in a way that millennials go, oh, I can do that. Oh, that's interesting to me. And you guys, in your case, have, like somebody like me, your book, y'all know this, but your book changed my life. It flat out changed my life.
Oh, thank you.
I've given out hundreds of copies of it. I mean, I just flat out love it. And, in fact, my wife and I, when we got engaged, part of our deal was she had to read that book. I I mean, that's how strongly I believe in these principles, and I think that millennial, and she'll tell you it changed how she looks at money. I mean, you guys know this, and it's just so important. So my point is, millennials that Greg is trying to reach, there's a whole group of millennials that say the thing they most want to be able to do is own their own business. That's the highest affinity response you'll get. I want to own my own business.
That's
but
the number one thing.
Number one,
most millennials want to own their own business. Wow.
Yeah,
and why is that?
Charts. Because we believe it's the only way to actually take control of our future and have an actual chance at financial freedom. Now, what's interesting, if you go deeper than that, is they don't actually know how to own their own business. And most of them will never do it, but that's kind of the desire, because our heroes are entrepreneurs. I mean, that's who our heroes are. And so back to your product, I think there's taking your principles and really be able to position them in a way that hit the segment of the millennials that you really want to speak to, and that you can totally do that. I mean, y'all have the hard part. It's just dressing at this point so that millennials know it's for them. The worst thing is that it's something that we think is for our parents.
Yeah, I have one last question that you said, because it's my love of my life is real estate. Is the dream of home ownership still part of the millennial culture?
Yes. Millennials are likely to be the largest group of home buyers this year, depending on which market you're looking at, but the data that we see. I think the challenge is that, as you know, with the credit markets right now, that the millennials who can actually get into a home is a much smaller number, and many of them have postponed it because they want to try to figure out what to do with their student debt. However, when you interview millennials, they still want a home. The big difference when we work with all these developers is that where millennials want to live is different than where their parents lived, and the amenities that they want are different than what their parents wanted. But if you put that aside, they still get the idea that one day they want to own their own house, and as rents continue to go up, like I live in Austin and rents are through the roof, you see them increasingly move that direction. But you know, a lot of even how to buy a home, millennials don't know how to do. I mean, that's the kind of basic nuts and bolts things that we just haven't learned. And we were raised by parents who didn't talk about money. I mean, I know you talk about this all the time, Robert, but our parents didn't talk about money because what happened? Like you said, they had ended up with credit card debt, a house that was too big. You know, my parents went through awful financial straits. I mean, the last people I want to learn from were them. You know? I can do a 0% balance transfer. I mean, we need people that will actually give us solid advice and that grows with us as we grow. And
that's where you see the Rich Dad Company kind of fitting in then. It's almost, you know, when I'm doing my research on the name of our company and all this stuff, you know, what this guy said, he was older than I am. He says what's coming up for baby boomers as well, and we didn't know about the millennials then. This is 30 years ago. He says that baby boomers were raised as spoiled brats. They had everything, and they lacked discipline. So what they were looking for was parental guidance. So he thought our name of Rich Dad, Poor Dad was a great brand title to put into the marketplace. So what you're saying is kind of the same thing as we can position ourselves as the parent you wish you had or something like that, or along those lines.
Yeah, I would say what we really want more than a parent, because you know that.
I know it's a bad name.
Yeah, but the word I would use that come to mind is a mentor. I mean, at the end of the day, millennials want mentors, and we want a mentor. Like my first mentor told me not to buy a house, and it cost me huge amounts of money. And that kind of stuff. So we want mentors that will really say, me too, I get where you are, I get what you're trying to do, I can help you get there, you know, here's the system to do it. That is what we need at the end of the day.
So, Jason, I also hear that millennials are not big trusters of the financial advisors and the whole financial industry, and that they would take financial advice from brands they trust, like Nike, Google, and Apple, even though they're not in the financial field. But they trust them, so they're looking for people that they trust more so than the industry itself.
Yes, so at a high level that's accurate because those brands have established themselves as standing for something, and the challenge with a lot of financial advisors, because we work with so many of them, is that their brands have not been introduced to millennials, or if they are, they think they're their parents' brands. And then now you want to have a meeting with me and give me a proposal? Like, that's the last thing millennials want. It's why so many of them are turning to online advice for their financial needs. The other thing that I think, Robert, you may have said that ties in with what Kim's saying is millennials are actually, and this is going to be a challenge, we are right now one of the most conservative generations ever at our age in terms of investing. You know, they think the stock market's unfair. They think, you know, there's no real way for them to be able to invest to meet their goals. So what do millennials do? They put it in either extremely conservative portfolios that they literally look like a 7-year-old from a persona standpoint, or they keep it in the bank. And you and I both know that either one of those strategies will not get them to the place where they can actually be able to retire at any reasonable age. And what millennials most want, ironically enough, is freedom. Right. You know, Boomers wanted the option to be free. Millennials actually want to take that freedom now.
Good. Hey, Jason, I will have to have you back on. You're fantastic. I learned a lot listening to you, so I thank you for that. And I want to thank
you.
And we've been going to the most popular part of our program called Ask Robert. You can submit your questions at richdadradio.com. And I want to thank Jason Dorsey, and he called in from Austin, Texas. We had Greg Arthur, who was the guy who was handling our millennial side, and my wife, Kim, who called in from Hilton Head, South Carolina. So I want to thank all of them. So, Melissa, what's the first question?
Thanks, Robert. Our first question today comes from Michelle in California. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. For those of us who believe the economy will crash, is starting a franchise or business risky at this time because it is not liquid, or should we wait until after the crash?
Well, there's no real answer to that, but if you're a true entrepreneur, the answer is it doesn't make any difference. So this is my point of view on this whole thing. You better decide you're going to be an entrepreneur or an employee, okay? And if you're going to be that, whatever you're going to be, if you're going to be an employee, you better should ask yourself, am I working for a company that'll survive the crash? Is it well managed? Is the leadership prepared for the ups and downs? And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you've really got to prepare yourself for ups and downs. As I was saying to Jason Dorsey, he says, well, the millennials are different. Well, they're people. And there's good people and bad people. There's great people and not so great people, my generation too. The difference is the baby boomers were raised in the biggest boom in history. And I mean in history. From 1970 to 2000, you could be the village idiot and still become a millionaire. That's not true today. So that's why the Rich Dad company is an education company. We don't really give advice. The hardest thing to do for most people is change the way they think. It's what you mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. It's really tough to change once you're kind of set. By the time you're 18, you're pretty well set. So my point of view here is, as an adult, you better decide, am I going to be an employee? Am I going to be self-employed, which is small? Or am I going to be a big entrepreneur in the B quadrant? Or am I going to be an investor in the I quadrant? Those are the basic questions. I don't care what generation you were born into. And today you have to ask yourself that question. Am I going to be an employee? Am I going to be small business, self-employed? Am I going to be like, Steve Jobs, start a big business? Or am I going to be a professional investor? Most people are not professional investors. They just save their money, or they turn their money over to a financial planner, or they invest in a 401k in America. That's not a bad program, but if that market crashes, the people without any education and without experience on how do you handle a massive downturn in the market will be wiped out. There's not matter how old you are, you will be wiped out. So you better make up your mind now as soon as you can and decide what's best for you. I decided a long time ago I was going to be in the B and the I side. And then I began studying and training and preparing for it. So today, when the market crashes, I'm going to make more money again. That is my attitude. And so it's just mentally how you look at everything. So it's a good question, but it has nothing to do with what's outside of you. It has to do with what you decide inside of you. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Dak in Anderson, Indiana. Favorite book, Midas Touch. How would you protect your business from having laws made against it, such as Uber or Airbnb or Amazon?
Well, it wasn't laws. I don't understand why would those be laws. Those are technology changes. They're the old businesses like, you look at Uber, they're not a new business, they're new technology. That's all they are. And if you look at what Uber is saying to you, they're already deciding that they're going to not need drivers. So why would I want to be an Uber driver when Uber plans to make me obsolete anyway? So that's really the big question there. Because it's Moore's law, it's going to double every 18 months. So to think that you're going to have a job for life, to me is old thinking, or my franchise will be around is old thinking. So that's why the Rich Dad company was founded, is better think a little bit quicker. Let me give one bit of advice. Is the reason I'm in real estate, there's many reasons I'm in real estate, but one of them is real estate will be here for a long time. They haven't figured out a way how to provide a house yet. So anyway, back in, I think, around 1975, I knew that I wasn't going to invest in stocks or shares or saving money or all that garbage. I started buying real estate. The reason is because no matter what age we're in, 500 years ago we needed a house. 500 years from now, we'll still need a house. As far as you guys who are saving money, think of it this way. In 500 years, the U.S. dollar will be gone, but gold and silver will still be here. So that's a way of thinking about things versus what should I do. So it's how you look at things and how you prepare yourself for what's coming. So I have gold, silver, I have real estate, because those are things that will last for eons. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Blake in Houston, Texas. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Says, what advice would you give to this 19-year-old who is in bad debt but wants to invest and have his money work for him? What would be my first step?
First step is get out of bad debt. The biggest question of all is what caused you to get into bad debt. See, I want you to tell you something really quickly here. The big banks and all that, I love those guys because they give me a lot of money. There's always 2-3 sides to a coin if you see my latest video. So the question is, how did you get into bad debt? And the reason most people struggle is because the most successful people make things easy. For example, it's really easy to save money. You could teach a chimpanzee to save money. You don't need any intelligence. The other thing is a 401k or retirement plan. All you have to do is walk in, you check off, I want this retirement plan. They make it really, really easy. And credit cards, they make it so easy to get a credit card. So that's why people are in debt, because I'm lazy. So you make it easy for me, I'm going to do it. Now, it's very, very hard to borrow $300 million. Very hard. But it's easy to get a credit card. So generally, if I'm saying to a 19-year-old kid, you had a great time to reevaluate who you are, why you're so lazy, how did you get set up to do something so silly that any idiot could do. A chimpanzee can save money, a chimpanzee can have a 401k, and a chimpanzee can get a credit card. So at this point in life, at 19, you're in a very good position to ask yourself, what can I do differently and not be a sucker for the easy way out? Okay, so Melissa, one more question, please.
Our last question today comes from Blanca in New Jersey. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. She says, how can I open a business and be different than the other businesses or my competitors?
That's a very good question, and that takes years of experience. You see, the most successful people have magic in them. Like Harley Davidson, there's a magic to Harley Davidson. The people love them. Apple, they love the product because there's magic. Most people are small business or self-employed. There's no magic in it. See, Rich Dad has a lot of magic in it, and that's why we're successful. But it took me years to develop how do you touch that magic, and that's called branding.